Now we find out that according to the State Department, there never was a protest against the U.S. Embassy in Benghazi, either over an anti-Muslim video or anything. It just reported that the State Department always believed that it had been a terrorist attack, which, of course, contradicts the White House's once long-held position that it had been caused by a video mocking the Prophet Muhammad. And it's just so very, very strange that you would have, after this knowledge was already passed on to the White House, days later, Susan Rice, UN ambassador, on Meet the Press saying, quote, "Our current assessment is that what happened in Benghazi was, in fact, initially a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired hours before in Cairo, almost a copycat of the demonstrations against our facility in Cairo, which were prompted, of course, by the video," unquote. Wow. We have assisting me in the opining department, old friend of the show, one of my regulars, Robert Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey. He's also former chief of staff of the House Committee on Aging, as well as being former communications director for both Congressman Rangel and Conyers of New York and Michigan, respectively. Bob Weiner, welcome back, buddy. How are you today?
It's a pleasure, Alan. And, you know, about 2 years ago, you and Jane invited me and Pat to join you at Bellagio in Las Vegas. We finally got there last week, and the most amazing thing was the Cirque du Soleil's underwater show and their water acrobatics show, which had more curves and turns than Mitt Romney's changes on abortion, health, and taxes. It's really a show you have to see in Las Vegas. It was absolutely amazing.
Talking about changing positions, what could be more kaleidoscopic than the way this administration has been comporting itself on the issue of Benghazi? What's your take on the latest bombshell revelation from the State Department exposing the White House for its cover-up on Benghazi? Your sense of it?
Well, I have been listening, and, you know, that's my old committee, by the way, that Issa and Cummings are having the hearings. I was the spokesman for the House Government Reform Committee, and what struck me is the fact that what came out was that Hillary Clinton had asked for $500 million more for security for embassies, and the Republicans rejected it and cut the embassy security funding by $500 million, and she protested in advance. So, you know, there's politics that can be played on both sides of this, and Cummings is exactly right. Congressman Cummings, the ranking Democrat, is exactly right that we've got to get the facts on this, and the way to get the facts isn't to play politics a month before the election on it.
Are you honestly telling me that had the GOP given those extra dollars for security, that for some reason Obama would not have falsely referred to it as an attack driven by the video?
Even in a court case, they give you more than a day and a half to do discovery. And so when you look for the facts, I still find the facts. A couple of days later, Jay Carney was already out there saying it looked like terrorism.
We have in front of us a vice presidential debate. They're going to be covering both
yes,
domestic and
on the
foreign
Ryan
policy.
Budget. That's what the debate will be on, in cutting Medicare.
Yeah, but where's the moral authority for your guy, given that he's already taken $716 billion out, while at the same time saying it'll extend the program?
Against fraud and abuse, whereas the Republicans want to cut benefits. It's a night-and-day difference that Obama will be pointing out in the future like he didn't do. He was inept in that first debate, and Biden won't be that bad. Biden will be right on spot.
Biden will be right on the spot. So you're thinking that Biden can do what the president could not?
I think we learned that we need to be aggressive when someone outright lies on so many things and doesn't state the facts on taxes. You know, he called for a 20%
Is that really the best response you guys got, liar, liar, liar? Is that really the best response you got, liar, liar, liar? Why don't you just acknowledge that when it came to the facts...
I just made the point on the 20% tax cut across the board that he said he didn't have. He said he's not doing it. He has nowhere to
Bob,
pay for it.
Even Stephanie Cutter, and we've played the clip on this show, Stephanie Cutter acknowledged, she stipulated that, in fact, they know that Romney's plan would not support a $5 trillion tax cut for the wealthy. She's already stipulated that. And yet, of course, the president's still going the other direction.
For a 20% cut, which adds up to $4.8 trillion. That's the problem. That's the very problem. That
it's revenue neutral. It's revenue neutral. It's revenue neutral. If you lower the tax rates, but you remove, if you lower the tax rates, but you remove the deductions, there you come.
Alan? Which one? Which deductions? You're going to take charity? You're going to take health care? You're going to take housing? Which one are you going to screw up the economy and Congress won't approve it? Which one are you going to take?
Bob, this is the problem that the Democrats have. You guys defend overspending by pointing to those who would be harmed should that
we're talking
overspending
about
stop.
facts here, Alan. Talking about changing the goalposts on the conversation. Romney lied about the fact that it's revenue neutral because he has no revenue to support
No. He said he'll go ahead and remove whatever. Listen, this is what he said. He said he will remove whatever deductions are necessary to bring about a change that's revenue neutral. Well, he's got to talk with you guys about it. Well, he mentioned a bunch of them. But, Bob, you can't expect him. Bob, you can't. I know the Democrats often have troubles with the rudiments of math.
No, we don't want to
but it is against all laws of numeric management to try to fit all the candidates for cutting in a 90-minute debate when there's still somebody else who has a chance to talk.
You can't possibly tell the facts the way they are. It's impossible to do.
What makes you think it's impossible? We already know that there's $300 billion.
It's not impossible.
We already know from the government accounting office that there's $300 billion misplaced each year.
Yeah, that's right.
Those $300 billion in and of itself takes care of a lot of the problems.
$5 trillion is Romney, plus $2 trillion that the Defense Department doesn't even need, and another trillion. He's talking about $8 trillion more against the budget, and he has no way to define where he's getting the money from.
He defined it. He just can't go through it item by item, but nobody expected Obama to do the same.
By saying it will happen. He's a magician.
Bob, you can try all you want. You can try all you want to subject people to an unattainable standard, which, of course, is to subject people to a standard that can never be realized.
Standard.
Bob, you cannot possibly validate what you've just said. Romney, with what is one little finger, has greater prowess and command over commerce and capitalism than your president could ever muster in a lifetime.
I have no idea what that means, but he hasn't said where he's getting his $8 trillion.
Bob, he doesn't have to enumerate them all. He can all he has to say.
That's what
he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to. That's for arguing later on. I don't recall you don't have the same expectation. Bob, you're the embodiment of the very thing you're criticizing and still expecting to be taken seriously. You're defending overspending again by pointing to the folks that would be harmed should that overspending stop. Now, we have assisting me in the Opani department still, Rob Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton Drug Czar General Barry McCaffrey. Bob, good to have you back.
Thanks, Alan. That last segment was fun. Let's go at it again.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm sorry I lost communication with my folks at the studio. Didn't realize we ran out. But let me get right to that. Let's pick up to where we left off. You were of the opinion that Romney simply never gave the required number of examples as to where he would cut deductions to counterweight the reduced tax rates. And you think that until he enumerates all of them, he hasn't really addressed the question. But I just don't necessarily see you expecting the same of your guy as it relates to what he would do to save the budget. Because let's remember, your guy had both of his last two budgets completely rejected by unanimously now both parties. So isn't he a little lacking in convincibility, Bob?
Well, actually, the budget bill that passed the Congress was a Republican and Democrat bill. It was a deal, and it calls for cuts across the board in all departments. And we actually have a budget. It wasn't a budget deal.
Not a budget. Not a budget. You guys haven't passed the budget in over 1,000 days. Why are you saying otherwise?
Well,
It's a matter of congressional record.
Budget Act, the quote-unquote Budget Act, I guess Congress
appropriations
has
bills were not completed. Without appropriation bills signed off, there's no official budget.
By the way, there's a difference between the budget and the appropriations, and I know you know the difference. There's a budget committee and there are appropriations committee. The Budget Act comes from the budget committees and the special committee that did the sequestration. There is a congressional budget. That's one of the big myths that the Republicans try to say, is that there hasn't been a budget. By definition, there has been a budget, and it was acted in bipartisan consort.
The fact that it has not yet been completed, denotatively and connotatively, means no budget. Now, maybe the operations or foundations were laid down. No. Maybe the foundations were laid down for one, but because they've not yet determined where those damn cuts are going to come from, they don't have a budget. They don't have a budget.
It's across the board cut, and it's across the board in both domestic and defense programs. And the Republicans are going berserk because it wants to cut the United States from being combined more than 10 of the 10 next countries combined in terms of our defense budget. And we have plenty to make us the most secure nation on earth out as much as we have for defense.
Here's my big question. Here's my big question. Here's my big question. Here's my big question. How is it possible, Bob, I'm talking to you. Bob, work with me, buddy. Am I addressing Helen Keller here or what? Listen to me. How is it possible? Bob, will you let me talk? Bob, will you listen to me? How is it possible for this president to have any moral authority whatsoever, or any of his apologists, such as yourself, having any moral authority whatsoever?
I am not an apologist for anybody other than what I believe.
Saying that unless Romney enumerates all of his specific cuts to deductions, that he hasn't satisfied his argument when it comes to how he's going to help the economy by lowering the tax rates, while at the same time you never enumerate all the ways that Obama will correct the budget. You just don't seem to have the capacity for self-appraisal that you're expecting from the other side, so why should anybody believe a word out of your mouth? You're not subjecting yourself to the same standards.
And Obama had agreed to a deal that the Tea Party blocked. You remember that 68 Republicans in the House stopped the grand bargain that Obama had agreed to. So he has had.
No, Obama did not agree. Obama, look, we both are familiar with the Bob Woodward book. And that book makes it abundantly clear that Obama, after having come to an agreement with Boehner, then decided to up the ante at the last moment, and that's when Boehner walked away. You know it, I know it, God knows it. Let me move on. Let me move on. Then talk to Bob Woodward. Talk to Bob Woodward, because he referenced the fact that once he was in the catbird seat after promising to reach across the aisle, turns out he said, you know what? We won the election. Election has consequences. Sit down and shut up. We don't need your ideas. That was Obama's reaction to the GOP. And now he's being hoisted by his own batar. Back to something else. Here we are. Tomorrow, Joe Biden and Ryan are going at it.
I'm looking forward
All of a
to it.
sudden, Biden is asked about the cover-up at Benghazi. How do you think he's going to handle it?
He's going to point out that Hillary Clinton asked for $1 billion in security, and the Republicans in Congress rejected it and didn't give it to us. That would have helped. But
how does that handle the cover-up? How does that handle the lie? How does that handle the prevarication? This is such a tertiary measure. Like an example I like to use is it's a bit like saying, hey, it's a bit like saying, hey, you know what? You shouldn't steal things from strangers because you just don't know where they've been. That's a tertiary measure. Okay,
this is
and
so
nobody's
minor
buying
compared to
the primary measure. The only legitimate measure of relevant points in any dialogue or debate is the one born out of the original rub, first exposing the conflict. You and I know that. So let me ask you this very specifically, Bob: how is the GOP not funding extra security overseas is somehow dispositive of why Obama decided to blame the Benghazi attack on a video as opposed to a planned terrorist attack? How does one lead to the other, Bob Weiner?
There's no question that there was a screw-up in terms of the branding of what happened until the facts were discovered, and it takes more than a day and a half, as I pointed out, even in a court case, for discovery to play out.
You're not addressing anything. You've said nothing. You've not addressed anything. You haven't addressed the point.
Less than a month away, and we have the facts now.
Why can't you respond on point? Now that we have you responding on point, guess what? Jay Carney, well, then ask me this. Let me ask you this. If what you say is true, why is it Jay Carney today denied that the president ever tried to say it was attributable to an anti-Muslim video? Today, in front of God and country, he said those very words.
There's a difference between what you find out and what you believe at the moment of time. You know,
what does that got to do with anything? You're responding to a question never posed, opposing an argument never said. Bob, think of yourself. Think of yourself. Bob, you're responding to a question never posed as well as opposing an argument never asserted. What I asked is if what you said was true about the evolving of this issue. If that were really true, and we just had to wait for all the facts to come in for people to start speaking more knowledgeably and more authoritatively. If all that were true, then why is it, despite all the additional knowledge we've gathered, you still got White House Press Secretary Jay Carney insisting that the president never tried to say it was about an anti-Muslim video, even now? Bob Weiner.
Well, I think that's a bit of a spin by Jay. I wouldn't disagree with that. But the fact is,
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
We got the facts as quickly as we could, and we have relayed them as quickly as we knew them. That's actually what Congressman Cummings is saying has to happen in this case before everybody shoots from the hip, which Romney did too on this, by the way.